Hey everyone, I'm going to go over a quick genetics example, and we're going to use just inheritance from one particular mom and dad and contrast that to how we calculate probabilities when we're doing population genetics. And this helps really understand the importance of when we multiply and when we add in probability. So we're starting out with an example where we have a particular mom and a particular dad in our Punnett square here. And we have a probability, because of how meiosis works, of mom, who's a heterozygote, having 1/2 big R alleles going into the eggs she's making, and 1/2 little r alleles, and the same thing for dad. So if we get a big R from getting one allele from mom and one from dad, we can also get a heterozygote, big R, little r. We can get that two different ways, right? One way with little r from mom, one way with little r from dad, and then we can get our little r, little r. This is an example of the gene for handedness, and it has an inheritance pattern that if you're big R or big R, little r, you're right-handed. So it has complete dominance versus little r, you're left-handed. So how do we calculate the probability of getting some proportion of these different offspring? For example, what's the probability of a heterozygous offspring from this combination of parents? We're going to use the probability rules to do that. That's going to be a probability of getting a big R, little r, or a little r, big R. So we need to find the probabilities of those two different things and add them together, because this is an OR question. We can get a heterozygote this way, or we can get the heterozygote that way. We're going to get the probability of big R, little r by multiplying the probability of getting a big R from mom, which is 0.5, times the probability of getting a little r from dad, which is also 0.5, and we're going to calculate the probability of getting a little r, big R the same way. So when we want to get a particular allele in combination with another particular allele, we're going to multiply the probabilities of each of those alleles and where they're coming from. All right, so this is our mathematical equation that we need to plug in some numbers. So we're going to get 0.5 times 0.5 plus 0.5 times 0.5, not very exciting. And then we're going to add together those products, so 0.25 plus 0.25 equals 0.5. Well, if you're looking at these four squares in our table and you're saying to yourself, well, of course, it's 2 out of those 4 squares that are going to give me that proportion of offspring. But that only works if the proportion of offspring of each of the alleles is exactly the same, 0.5 and 0.5. So let's look at a different example that allows us to see what happens in that case. All right, so we're going to do a population genetics example. So instead of looking at one particular mom and one particular dad, we're looking at all of the big R and little r alleles that are in the population. So we need to have genotyped our population so we know how many alleles of each kind are present. But suppose we know for this population that we have 0.75 big R and 0.25 little r's. That means when we have any parents that are coming together to mate, that out of all of those gametes that are coming together, 75% of them are going to end up being big R's, right? And they're going to mix together randomly with all the other alleles that are present in the population, these two alleles. And so the probability of getting each of these possible outcomes is going to depend on the frequency that they exist in the population to start with. All right, let's go through it step by step. If we want to find out the slightly different version of this question, what's the probability of being right-handed? Remember, our inheritance pattern is that all of the heterozygotes and the homozygous dominant is going to be right-handed. So we want to find the probability of big R, or big R, or little r, big R. So any of these three possible ways we can get a right-handed offspring. That means we're going to take the probability of big R and add it together to the probability of big R, and then add that to the probability of little r, big R. All right, so to find the probability of big R, we aren't just going to take 0.5 and 0.5, because we've been told in this problem that big R has a proportion in the population of 0.75. So in order to find our probability of big R, we need to substitute those correct probabilities into that equation. So we're going to multiply 0.75 times 0.75. So the probability of the big R combo is 0.56. Following along the same way, we're going to find the probability of the big R, little r. We have to multiply the probability of a big R times the probability of the little r to get that. So we're going to do 0.75 times 0.25 and get 0.1875. We're going to do the same thing to find the probability of little r times big R, right? Probability little r times probability big R. And we're going to get 0.25 times 0.75, which obviously also equals 0.1875. All right, remember that multiplication is associative, and that means that whether we multiply the 0.25 first or the 0.75, we'll get the same number. So if you skipped ahead and said, well, these are going to be the same, we can just do 2 times 0.1875, that's correct. All right, so we have our probabilities of each of these possible genotypes, and we're going to add them together. All right, and that's going to give us our probability of getting a right-handed offspring. Right, so because it's dominant in the population, and because there's a much higher frequency of the big R allele compared to the little r allele, most of our population, 0.94, is going to be right-handed. All right. What's the probability of someone in the population being left-handed? Well, we can either calculate it by doing little r times little r, 0.25 times 0.25, or we can take 0.94 and subtract it from 1. Because of all of the things that can happen in the population, the only thing that's left over is going to be being left-handed. So we'll do that 1 minus 0.94, and we'll get 0.06. All right, this population actually has a little, quite a bit lower proportion than our population does of being left-handed. All right, I hope getting a chance to go back through this a couple times, looking at what things we're multiplying, what things we're adding, and why it makes a difference will help you understand how to do probability mathematics.